And if you're not able to, you will just be over, in the top of our screen. Not a problem at all.
Okay, I have done that. I know what to do, okay?
All right, wonderful. We'll continue to let people in the lobby, from the lobby. So if you would like to, I'm going to hand it over to Kelly. Welcome everybody to this virtual session on normal aging and brain health. Someday soon, hopefully we'll be together in person, but until then, we appreciate you joining us on our virtual presentations that we have every month. And I've been trying to get this lady for a few months now, so I'm thrilled to have Kelly Atkins here. So I'm going to just hand it over to you, Kelly.
Hi, everybody. As Susan said, my name is Kelly Atkins, and I am a certified dementia practitioner. I worked at Azura for about 7 years, and now I've kind of branched out on my own. And what I'd like to do today is just have a real open, fun time with each other and talk a little bit about what the difference is between normal aging and dementia or Alzheimer's and those cognitive delays that we're seeing through dementia. Next slide, please. So part of why I do this is my grandma, and these pictures are a couple years old, but she just turned 97 on October 4th, and she is now in a nursing home, which she was at home every other presentation that I've done. So this is kind of odd. She had a stroke and ended up in a nursing home. But I think we all have people in our lives that have gotten older, as each one of us does every day. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how we can exercise our brains and how we can keep our brains healthy. For my grandma, she doesn't have dementia, but her body is not being kind to her. She's no longer walking, and so her brain is on fire. She remembers more things than I do, but it's her body that is deteriorating, which is why she ended up in a nursing home. So a lot of times as we get older, I'm sure most of you will agree, it's usually either our brains or our bodies that start to deteriorate more, one more than the other. And like I said, today we're going to talk a little bit more about how we're going to exercise our brains. Next slide, please. So the human brain is actually pretty fascinating. It's 3 pounds of matter, but it is the most fascinating matter on the planet. And this quote that I have up on the screen is actually from Pam Schiller. The human brain is the most fascinating 3 pounds of matter on this planet, maybe even the universe. We're still studying the brain, and there's new clinical studies that come out all the time about how our brain operates and how memories work. And I try to keep up on those and read, because we all want to find a cure to dementia. Next slide, please. Oh, one more.
There we go.
There we go. So this is a magnified view. When someone has dementia, they develop plaques and tangles in their brain. And those plaques and tangles are what interferes with communication and why we see some of the behaviors that we see. So this is a magnified viewpoint. The bigger slide is, you can see the plaques where it says Alzheimer's cells. Those are the plaques and the amyloid congestion there. And then on the lower slide, you can see a healthy brain, or a brain that doesn't have the plaques and the tangles in them, disrupting the communication. What happens in someone's brain with Alzheimer's or dementia is that they, a lot of the brain that gets atrophied is in the rear part of the brain. And the amygdala, which is in the center part of the brain, is the part that stays lit up. And the amygdala part of our brain is, I always think of it like a 3-year-old. It's impulses, and it's when you do things, just reactive. And so a lot of times when we see someone with dementia and they're hitting out or reacting to something, it's because they only have their fight or flight response lit up in their brain. They don't have the executive function and a lot of the other functions that you and I are using in our brains. Any questions about this? I'm happy to answer at the end unless someone has one now. Otherwise, next slide. So this is a scan, a PET scan that was taken after death. Unfortunately, we don't get these types of scans until someone has passed away. But the brain on the left is a healthy brain, or a normal brain after death. And then the one on the right is a brain that was affected by dementia. And you can see the atrophy and the smaller size in this person's brain due to the decay and, as mentioned, the atrophy that happens when someone has dementia. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about what is dementia before we get into how we're going to exercise our brains. So dementia is, a lot of people, you know, in past generations, it used to just be called senility, or people just thought, you know, ladies were getting older and forgetting things. But what we found scientifically is that dementia is both a chemical and a structural change in our brains. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about some examples of what normal aging is versus abnormal aging. So a lot of us occasionally forget why we came into the room for something, right? I mean, I do it all the time. Like, I walk into a room and I forget what I walked in there for. I have noticed after I'm passing through menopause, though, that it's getting better for me. So that's encouraging. But the difference when someone has dementia is that they're not able to plan a task. Like, for example, following a recipe, or perhaps you want to go from your home to the store and those details of how to get to the store become confusing to you. Placing a telephone call and punching in the numbers becomes an issue, or playing a game that you've played your whole life and you have to start to think about what the rules of the game are or how the game process is. And so when someone is having cognitive issues, it's more detailed and more specific than just walking into a room and forgetting, you know, what you came in there for. All of us do that, and that's a normal sign of aging. It becomes abnormal when you're not able to follow a recipe, as I mentioned, or, you know, a map to go somewhere. Next slide, please. Another example would be that sometimes you have trouble finding the right word. You're in conversation with a friend and you can't come up with the word or someone's name, for example, and you're not coming up with it. And I'm sure we've all done the little trick where you tell yourself to not think about it, and then the name comes into your mind. Now, if someone has dementia, which I'm going to backtrack for just 1 second because there's something I didn't say. So people get confused about what dementia is. And if you picture an umbrella, and this might be in my slide presentation, it's been a while. If you picture an umbrella with dementia being at the top of the umbrella, there's 70 plus kinds of dementia underneath that umbrella. Alzheimer's disease is the most common name used to describe dementia, but there's Lewy body dementia, and Parkinson's has a type of dementia. And then there's frontal lobe and multiple, 70 plus different kinds. And so throughout this presentation, I'll intermittently use the words Alzheimer's or dementia, but just so the message is clear that dementia stands for the 70 plus kinds of cognitive impairment that can occur. So anyway, back to language. So sometimes we forget someone's name or we forget a word, but people with Alzheimer's are forgetting simple words, and then they're substituting words for the word. Instead of finding toothbrush, they're going to say that thing for my mouth, or they're going to point to their mouth. It's my belief that every person that has dementia wants to go back to their normal way. And that's why a lot of times we see them rummaging for things or going to the door if they're in a facility. And but the bigger thing is that they compensate. When they first start to recognize that these things are happening, they use language and they compensate for their lack of understanding the word because of shame, and because the brain isn't as noticeable as our heart or having cancer. Because really, dementia is no different than having cancer or heart disease. It just affects the brain, and so that has some more shame and feelings about that versus having cancer or heart disease, for example. I just lost my train of thought, but it will come back to me, and I don't believe that's dementia. I will tell a quick story though. So, and I hope the other one comes back to me because it was more important. But I had a lady once at Azura, and I loved her very much. And when her daughter came in to see me, she had found her mother in the bathroom putting hydrocortisone on her toothbrush and brushing her teeth with it. and was proud of herself because she thought she was using toothpaste and it was actually hydrocortisone. And so I remembered what I was going to say. Yay. A lot of times when people are compensating for these types of things, family members don't notice right away. And what I was going to say, if you all have a pen, I'm going to give you a article to read that I find is one of the best articles I've ever read from the point of view of someone who actually has dementia. It's a pretty long article. You're going to have to Google it. You're going to have to put it into your internet search bar to find it. And if anyone has any problems, you can reach out to me. But the article is on the New York Times. Give me one second. And it's called Fraying at the Edge. Fraying at the edge. And it's like I mentioned, a longer article from the perspective of a woman that was diagnosed with dementia. And she talks about how she covered up and how she tried to use language and keep it from her family because of the shame that she felt in having the disease. I encourage all of you, if you have time or any explicit interest in this, that you look up that article. Next slide, please. So also, sometimes we forget what day of the week it is, or we're in the car and like, where was I going again? And that's normal aging. With dementia, people become lost in their own neighborhood and not know how to get home. Or they can be following, now that we're in internet technology, they can be following even a Google map and not be able to cognitively follow that Google map home. And so it's much more detailed and much more significant when someone has dementia and they're forgetting something occasionally. Next slide, please. Again, another example would be we all misplace our keys or sometimes our wallet. My son left his wallet at home today from work, so after this, I'm going to retrieve it for him. But a person with dementia will actually put things in unusual places. They'll put the iron in the freezer or a wristwatch in the sugar bowl. A gentleman that I'm helping right now was taking things out of the freezer and putting them into the oven, and she would find them unthawed in the oven, hours later. And so, they're just those plaques and tangles in their brain are disrupting the communication and their ability to complete tasks. Next slide, please. This is kind of redundant, but we all forget names and appointments occasionally. But with dementia, the person isn't able to recall the names, and they also forget more often, and then are more unlikely to actually be able to recall the information later, like you and I do. Like I just did, for example, when I remembered the story. That's normal aging. But someone with dementia would not be able to retrieve that, and perhaps they would try to describe the person or talk about hair color. Or sometimes a lot of the ladies that I work with would describe me as tall because I'm tall, and so they'll use other adjectives to try to describe the situation. The thing with dementia is it changes so rapidly. We had a gentleman at Azura, and his first name was Jack. And Jack developed rockets. He worked for NASA, and he developed rockets that went into space. So his brain power was like 10 times higher than mine. And we were able to take him outside. He didn't get any visitors. And so we were able to take him outside for walks. And so one day I got to work and he was standing at the door and he wanted to go outside. And so I took him outside. But the two things I didn't do that day as a director and as a dementia practitioner is I didn't take my phone with me, and I didn't tell anybody I was walking outside because I didn't know that his condition had changed in the 24 hours or so since I'd been to work. So we got out in front of Azura all the way down to the Midway Motor Lodge, and Jack is trying to cross the street and go home and look for rockets. And I used all my special skills that I have as a dementia practitioner, and I failed. And so the whole way we were walking, I was imagining that we were going to make the Channel 9 news that night for a escaped person from a nursing home or whatever. But a man ended up walking towards me, and I asked him to stop at Azura when he got up there. And he sent my work partner, who brought a wheelchair. And Jack proceeded to take his shirt off and his shoes and throw them at us because he was not happy now. But we got him back in, and he was safe. And unfortunately, he was never able to go outside again. but it was a great learning opportunity and a great training opportunity for me to be able to talk to the caregivers, because all of us, especially with dementia, you can have all the training in the world and dementia is going to change, and it's going to change in front of you very quickly, and you have to be able to adapt. And the biggest thing that I like to tell people before we get to the next slide is that it definitely isn't their fault. They're not doing it on purpose. And the best way to support someone that has dementia or Alzheimer's is to be in the moment with them. And unless they're a danger to themselves or to others, let them continue what they're doing. If for instance, they have a knife in their hand, you want to try to trade. You want to try to say, hey, look at this, and trade it versus showing a big reaction to it. Almost like you would with a 3-year-old, because you remember that amygdala in their brain is the part that's lit up. And so they're reacting to stimuli just as a 3-year-old would, and they can be easily distracted. Next slide, please. So our brain is made up of more than 1 billion network nerve and support brain cells. The plaques that build up in the brain from the picture I showed you earlier is a built up protein called amyloid, beta amyloid, and it happens between the nerve cells in somebody that has dementia. And then the tangles become twisted fibers, and it's a protein called tau that actually forms inside of their cells. UW-Madison is actually doing a big study. They've been doing it for the past 20 years, looking at brains of those who suffer from dementia. So if you know anyone that suffers from dementia, it's good to look up that clinical study, because they're trying to make a difference. And as I mentioned earlier, the only way to really study the brain of someone who has dementia is after death. And so it's very crucial that they get these brains so that we can find a cure to the disease. Next slide, please. I miss being in front of you all, by the way. It's not the same. And I'm proud of all of you for using your brains today to get on this call, because that was a big deal. You probably couldn't have done 2 years ago for some of you. So that was exercising your brains, by the way. So what are the risk factors of dementia? One of them, and one of the higher risk factors, is that it's family history or genetics. And if you have someone in your family that, said were senile, or perhaps nowadays did have a diagnosis of dementia, that is a risk factor. After age 65, your risk doubles, and then it doubles every 5 years after. Over the age of 85, all of us have a 50% chance of getting dementia. Severe head injuries, we hear about a lot of the football players that have CTE, and a lot of the brain injuries that happen that develop dementia. An unhealthy lifestyle, heart disease, diabetes, stroke, blood pressure, and high cholesterol can cause it as well. I'm gonna see if I can move this. I'm missing something off my slide. Am I missing something? I can't see the bottom of my slide. I don't know if I'm missing one. I probably am. I apologize. I don't have it memorized. So I don't know what it is, but you see it on the screen. So there are other factors involved in how someone can get dementia. Some of the saddest ones I've seen are alcohol related, where someone has developed alcoholism and all the contributing factors to that, and then developed dementia. It's one of the saddest types of dementia that I personally have ever seen, and it's very difficult as well. Next slide, please.
Just so you know, it just said heart disease, diabetes, stroke, high blood pressure, or high cholesterol at the bottom of the slide.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
So there's some myths around dementia, though, that I always like to mention too. I kind of alluded to one earlier, that when you get old, you lose your memory or your mind, and that's not true. That dementia or Alzheimer's is an old person's disease. There's a 37-year-old in town right now that has dementia, and it's very, very sad. Dementia only happens to others. Only women get Alzheimer's, or dementia affects only the patient, not the patient's family or anyone around them. There has been a clinical study, and it wasn't just specific to Alzheimer's, that said that a caregiver for someone in their home, which I believe a lot of people are doing in the current state of healthcare we're in, that it takes 7 years off the caregiver's life to care for their loved one with any chronic disease, cancer, dementia, whatever it would be. And so it absolutely affects the loved ones. And if you know someone, or you yourself are going through this, there are support groups in town, as well as other support systems through the Aging and Disability Resource Center, the United Way. There's memory cafes, and I myself will always help a family in need. I help families weekly place their loved one or do an assessment. And so there is help out there. Something that happens interestingly, though, with dementia is that family dynamics become involved. And by family dynamics, I mean that our family's our family. And when we have a doctor tell us that we can't drive anymore, that has more of a credence to it than if your wife just says, hey, honey, I'm going to take those keys. So I took care of a gentleman at Azura, and his name was Wayne, and I have permission to tell this story. Wayne was a teacher at West. He was a math teacher, and he and his wife and I became good friends. Wayne was one of the residents, one of 2 residents in the 7 years I was there that we had to send out. We had to send him to Amory Mental Health because he became a danger to himself or others. And during that time, Pat and I became friends. And so recently, Pat had a stroke, and I became her caregiver. She had a long-term insurance policy, and she just passed away a couple weeks ago. And she was like a mother figure to me. But the last time I saw her doctor, I looked at him and I said, hey, Dr. Allen, you know what Pat and I have going on right now? We have family dynamics going on right now, because now I'm like a daughter to her, and she doesn't hear me the same anymore. And so what I want to point out to you today is if you have a loved one that has any disease, whether it's dementia or cancer or anything that makes them less than, it's very difficult for them to hear family give them direction. And I call it family dynamics, for lack of a better term. And it's always easier for an outside person to be able to communicate the news or to get them to shower or whatever it's going to be. And so that's a factor that plays into the caregiver, losing 7 years of their life in a clinical study potentially, because it's a lot on the caregiver taking care of anyone with a chronic illness, right? Yeah. Okay, next slide. So these are some of the famous people that have been affected by Alzheimer's and dementia. Seth Rogen, Robin Williams, Ronald Reagan, Perry Como, E.B. White. Boy, this slide used to do really pretty fancy things. I don't know what happened to it. I'm gonna have to look at it later. Anyway, Aaron Copland. Oh, well, that was one of them. Anyway, Ben Hogan. Look at, I'm remembering stuff, you guys. It's been like a year since I've looked at this presentation. This particular one. Glenn Campbell, Charles Bronson, and I bet some of you are even thinking of a few others that I don't have on here that have passed away. Robin Williams in particular, I think brought a lot of light to dementia, a lot of awareness. And I think it's important when famous people do divulge their disease and let their families talk about it, because it helps us all to get more funding and just to get it talked about more. As I mentioned, there's a stigma involved when it's the brain with anything with, mental illness or dementia. Next slide, please.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, see, that's the stuff I'm remembering. Apologize. Okay, so there are some things that mimic dementia, and I've seen a few of these happen. That someone's got a diagnosis of dementia, but some drugs, some prescribed medications can mimic dementia. Sometimes if depression gets bad enough and there's like a psychosis, it can also mimic dementia. Some certain metabolic conditions can mimic dementia and make someone not remember things. Your eyes and your ears being off balance or potentially having an infection can cause dementia-like symptoms. Poor nutrition, a tumor on the brain or in certain other places can mimic dementia. And then urinary tract infections and certain other infections, which this one's important. And that's what I've seen twice, is that a urinary tract infection mimicked dementia. And I mean, the person ended up in a memory care home, and when the infection cleared up, they were lucky enough that their cognition came back in one of the cases. So there are some things, and you should always ask questions if it's your loved one, and always make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how we exercise our brains. And I've alluded a little bit to the fact that by today, literally by doing this presentation, not just driving down to the United Way office and sitting in an audience, which I miss very, very much. But this is a way to exercise your brain. And like I say to people, and usually when I'm in your presence, I bring plastic forks and spoons and I hand them out. And I challenge all of you. So I am giving you all a challenge right now that tonight, when you have supper or dinner, that if you're left-handed, you eat with your right hand. And if you're right-handed, you eat with your left hand. And you try to complete your meal by eating with the opposite hand. And this is a way to exercise our brains. And so I don't have my plastic forks because we're doing this through the waves of the internet. But I believe you all have a fork. And you can try to do this tonight. And it will be more challenging than you think. And for those of you that do it, I used to give a prize out for this, but we're in a different world now. But I will appreciate an email if you did it to let me know how it felt and how it went. And my email is all over this presentation, so you can grab it. And so please do that tonight and let me know how it goes. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about sleeping, because I find that as we get older, we are more times than not napping more during the day. And then from what I understand, and I hang out with a lot of people over 75, that then they're waking up earlier. So my biggest message on this slide is that insomnia is not a normal part of aging. Our bodies do change with aging, as do our brains. But there's other things that we can do to try to support our good sleep habits. Your environment can have a big part of it. If you are napping during the day and then not sleeping at night, to try to take less naps will give you better REM sleep during the night. Drinking alcohol is always disruptive to sleep, no matter how you look at it. And not having the same time that you go to bed every night can also be an issue. There's also some things that go on with a person as they get older that sometimes are untreated. People can suffer from restless leg syndrome, from diagnosed insomnia, from sleep-distorted breathing, such as sleep apnea. And you're getting, the BiPAP machines, and no one loves those. But when you're not getting enough oxygen into your body, it does affect your brain. And so it's really important that you talk to your doctor and make sure that if you're having sleeping issues, that it isn't sleep apnea or a snoring issue or something like that, where you're not getting enough oxygen into your body while you're sleeping. Next slide. So other causes can be medications. Sometimes, doctors add a new medication to what we're already doing, and it can affect our sleep. If you find that this happened, it is something to talk to your doctor about to see if there would be a different medication, or just to have the conversation so that they know. And then other reasons that sleep can be affected are pain. As we get older, our bladders change and we have to get up to urinate more often. And I'll raise my hand and say that I will wear Depends someday versus having to get up that many times. And wearing the Depends is better than taking a medication for that, in my opinion. They make pretty ones now, even. They make pretty panties. It's okay. Arthritis, asthma, diabetes, osteoporosis, heartburn can affect sleep, menopause, which I can attest to. And then, of course, Alzheimer's affects sleep as well. A lot of times someone with dementia has their clock completely turned around and are sleeping during the night and, during the day and then up all night. So that happens as well. Next slide, please.
Kelly, there was a question in the chat.
Sure.
The question is, how many naps a day are normal for a person over 80? My father-in-law naps a lot. I don't know exactly how much, but is this a concern?
I want to first state that I'm not a doctor. And so this is just my personal opinion as Kelly Atkins. I don't know that there's any number of naps that's normal. What I would want to look at is what his life pattern was, and like what he did prior to this, and then when this started, and if there was anything else going on, like we've mentioned, like medication changes or maybe a loss of some sort that could be depression. And if nothing else in his environment has changed, my advice would probably be to call his family practice doctor and mention it. But my gut is telling me at his age, and you can absolutely reach out to me if you want to talk about this on the side, that he's bored, that he needs more stimulation. And I don't know why I feel that way, and I don't have all the details, but boredom can cause someone just to fall asleep if they're not doing things. And so then we're going to talk a little bit about some things to do here in the next couple slides. But if you did need ideas or you wanted to talk through that, you can feel free to reach out to me as well. And I hope I answered your question. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Welcome. Next slide. So what are some good sleep tips? It's always important to keep a regular sleep schedule. You should go to bed and wake up at the same time, even on the weekends. And I did this for myself maybe 10 years ago, and it really made a difference in my life. Even on the weekends, I wake up at my work times. Be engaged, as I mentioned with this gentleman. Social activities, family and work can keep your activity level up. And if the person's elderly and they're not technologically, up on technology, there's still, adaptive stuff you can do for them. And I have ideas about that if anyone needs them. And then, a rule of thought is to experiment with napping. A lot of times when it's the person themselves that's doing the napping, they're not able just to stop that behavior because of boredom or whatever else is going on. And so they need family or other people to sort of help them with that. Napping too close to bedtime can interfere with nighttime sleeping. So shorter naps earlier in the day are recommended. But I don't know that I know many of my elderly friends that aren't getting a cat nap in the afternoon. And so it's a point of like scheduling a visit or scheduling an activity during that time, for a few weeks to break out of that habit of falling asleep. Next slide, please. Expose yourself to sunlight. Bright sunlight increases melatonin, which increases your sleep-wake cycles. And we should all try to get at least 2 hours of sunlight a day in January in Wisconsin, which is really, really a challenge. But, they also have those lights now and different ways to get vitamin D, and we should all be taking vitamin D for sure as well, if your doctor approves it. Block out snoring. If snoring is keeping you up, try earplugs, try a white noise machine, or eventually separate bedrooms if that's what's disrupting your sleep. Go to bed earlier if you skip your nap and you're feeling tired at 7:30 versus 8 or whatever it is. Try to follow your body clock and go to bed when your body's telling you to if you're struggling. Quitting smoking can help. Nicotine is a stimulant and it can help keep you awake. But if you can't quit, try to play around with your smoking a little bit and maybe not smoke a few hours before bed and see if that helps as well. Next slide, please. So water, this is something I struggle with as well. So I can't raise my hand and say I'm good at this. I'm like a camel. But our bodies are made up of 60 to 75% water. I'm now at the age where I do check the color of my pee, and all of our urine when we go to the bathroom should be clear. It should not be dark yellow. If it ever has an odor or it is a darker color, you should immediately call your doctor because that is a sign of a urinary tract infection. And I recommend this as well as many organizations and the government and lots of people and doctors. 8 glasses of water a day is what's recommended to keep our bodies moist and working properly. Next slide, please. If we don't do that, that's how I feel some days because I don't drink enough water. Then we get dehydrated. And what dehydration does to our bodies once we're 70 and plus is it does all kinds of bad things. It can cause us to have a UTI, urinary tract infection. Our brains don't work correctly. We're lethargic and tired. So we don't want to look like that guy. We want to be strong and have our brains working properly and be exercising them. Next slide, please. So why is dehydration so common though? And I made a joke about it, but it is pretty serious. Like I would say that if I was going to be bold, and now we're in 2022, I'm going to say that 80% of the people in a nursing home, 75, are dehydrated because there's just too many people to get them to drink 8 glasses of water a day, give or take. So why does this happen in the elderly versus younger people? Medications can do it. If you're on more than a couple medications, some high blood pressure, some antidepressants are diuretics. Some cause sweating, which causes you to deplete fluid. And then some even lessen the need to feel thirst. Also, elderly people are dependent on other people. Sometimes they're not feeling that need to drink. And so they're not asking for it and they're not being offered it. And so it's just not happening. But when we are chronically dehydrated, like the little dude that was up on the last screen, we lose kidney function, and our kidneys can't conserve the fluid. And so then we're just, pruning up. And then illness, vomiting or diarrhea in this influenza world we're in right now, can also cause, on top of already being dehydrated, if you get an illness, then, that's when we really see potassium being affected and dehydration being really prominent. Next slide, please. So what do we do about it? What do we do about our dehydration? And I see Susan, and these are things you can do. Like, really, I challenge all of you once an hour in your chairs, if that's where you're sitting every day, of calisthenics. And I'm lifting up my legs too, which you can't see. And you can do little things to get your circulation going. I myself run around my house for 3 minutes once an hour if I'm home all day, which I look like I would never ever show anyone that because my house isn't that big, but I run for 3 minutes, and that's the level I'm at, just to get my heart rate up enough so that I feel like I'm, doing something. But any sort of movement like this, especially if you're just sitting, even just holding your hands above your head is huge. If you can just set a timer for a minute and just keep them up there, it's very beneficial to your body and to your brain. Next slide, please. So all of us have the ability to exercise, and it's recommended that you do 30 minutes a day. I like the idea of doing it during a commercial or, every 2 hours or every 1 hour, whatever works for you and is not going to intimidate you or scare you away. There's multitudes of exercises besides mine and Susan's little adaptations there. You can do multiple things. They have bikes that you can sit in your chair and do, and they have the Y has give me the name of it, the place where y'all go. I love that place. The
landing.
The landing. Yep. So there's all kinds of things our community offers for not only exercise, but for socialization and card games. And we're going to talk in a minute, but I challenge you all to pick a different game than you normally play. Like if you play Sudoku, let's go to something else that you don't like, that you don't really play very often, like whatever, crossword puzzles, because that exercises your brain too, in even a different way than using different hands to eat. Next slide, please. So one other factor in this before we get to that is that the DASH diet, or the dietary approaches to stop hypertension, has shown a 30% increase in brain health. And what this diet is, it's a low sodium diet, it's low in fat, and then it's rich in all the beautiful fruits and vegetables that are greens and purples and reds and all those beautiful colors where you're getting the antioxidants in. Anyone that's ever had any kind of heart issues and gone to the cardiac rehab are familiar with this diet. My work partner, who was my size and 52, had 2 heart attacks while I worked with her at Azura. That's what dementia does to you. Just kidding. She's fine now, but this diet that she had to switch to was one of the hardest things she had to do because it's very low sodium, but it has been shown to increase brain health in multiple clinical studies. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, you want to try to get to the dark green vegetables, kale and spinach and Brussels sprouts. There's alfalfa sprouts, broccoli, and you can see the list there with all the other colors of vegetables. It's important to try to include those in your daily diet. I bought my daughter's going to go to college this year, and I bought her a bullet blender, like an individual blender. And it's working so well, I've used it a few times to make this, besides getting out my big blender. So it's always a way, if you're not liking the flavors of some of this, is to try to make it into a smoothie or a drink so that you're still getting your nutrients in. And any fermented vegetables as well, like if you know what kombucha or kimchi or sauerkraut, all of that stuff is very good for your gut. And there's been new clinical studies that have shown that our guts are just as important of a communicator to our body as our brain is. And so it's always good to be taking care of our bellies in tune with our brains. Next slide, please. More examples. So fruits that do this are prunes, raisins, figs, blueberries, blackberries, strawberries, etc. And all of these are high in antioxidants, and they basically feed your brain and feed your body, your cells, good stuff to reproduce and to multiply. Next slide. So exercise all your muscles. We talked a little bit about from the neck down, from the neck up. You can do cognitive stimulation. You can talk to a friend and take a trip down memory lane and elicit memories from each other, and remember things that the other person's remembering, which elicit new memories for you or elicit old memories that are coming back forward. I did not explain that very well, but I think you got what I was trying to say. You can do math forwards and backwards. Try counting back from 105s or 107s, and make yourself challenge to count forward or backwards. You could even pretend you're getting picked up behind a cop car, and you can like do your ABCs backwards if you want, and that could be like a fun little game. But anything you're doing to challenge yourself forwards or backwards and making it fun, in all seriousness, are what is going to exercise your brain. There's learning programs like this, and there's multiple other courses and things you can do to get on electronics and technology and learn new things. And I always suggest that if I'm a reader on my phone. I read a lot, but I've been reading on my Nook or my phone. And my 17-year-old daughter still reads hardcover books, which cost me a lot of money, but I love it. And so I challenge you to do that too. Is if you're a hardcover book reader, try to switch off to something else and read one electronic book just to have your brain work in a different way. Even though I would never say that reading electronic books is the way, because my daughter at 17, that's probably the only thing she does do that's old fashioned. But I do admire her for that, because I want to read the book and then I just order it immediately and I start reading it because I just can't wait. Where she waits and wants to feel the cover of the book and all of that good stuff. Anyway, new experiences. If this is the first time you're at this course, bravo to you for challenging yourself to get on here and to listen to some girl talk for an hour. But other new experiences, if you're not a walker, go outside and go for walks. Check out the landing if you haven't checked out the landing. And check out a lot of, there's a group in Wausau that will take you on a bike ride in a cart down by the water. And there's all kinds of it might be through the United Way, actually. So there's all kinds of programs and new experiences that you can do. And fear, a lot of times, prevents us from trying those new things. And a lot of times, if you look at it like it's exercise, like I'm exercising my brain and I'm just going to push myself, and I will almost promise you that if you do push yourself, the uncomfortable feeling doesn't last very long. And then you're in it and you're having new experiences and you're providing those new experiences to your brain as well as blood flow, and you're making a difference in the world. So I encourage all of you to do that and to maintain your curiosity, to ask questions, and there's no question that is silly or shouldn't be asked, and to share your wisdom and your knowledge, because I learn more from the elders that I hang with than I think I've learned from any book. Next slide.
We do have a question. What is your opinion of brain-enhancing medications like Prevagen?
There hasn't been a lot of clinical studies that those are, this is my opinion, that those make a big difference. What I'll say is if I had a loved one, I don't think it hurts to take that. But once somebody has a diagnosis of dementia or any cognitive, I don't think it's doing anything clinically significant at that point. But I do think to take those as a preventative measure, and there's some good, as long as that's the one mentioned was a good one. But it doesn't help the person once they have dementia. There really isn't any drug right now that does in a clinically substantial way. But some of those, if you have let's play this out. If you have a genetic component in your family, like your aunt or your mother or someone had dementia, I would recommend taking that then, yes. Starting in your 30s and 40s, and then to continue to take it, and to exercise and do some other things. But yes, but not for the person that has dementia. In my professional opinion, I don't think it's clinically useful. Okay. So I got onto this one a little bit, but there's all kinds of games right now that you can play for cognition. There's multiple apps. The one with an L that's escaping me, Lumini, whatever. Someone help me with that one. Anyway, Otherwise, I'll look it up before it's over. But there's multiple cognitive games in the app stores or in the Google store. And those are all beneficial to your brain. Now, if you, like I mentioned, if you play Sudoku every day or you get up and do that puzzle, I really do challenge you to do a different one that you don't like. Or if you play cribbage and that's what you've played, you know, for the past 20 years with your groups of people, switch it up and learn how to play bridge. I just met with a lady this week and she's gonna teach me how to play dominoes because I challenged her. So I really do challenge you to do that. And one thing that happens as we get older, because we get older, is that we kind of get set in our ways. And we get set in the ways we do things, and we eat at a certain time, we play this game at a certain time. But I challenge you to not see it that way, to see it as your young 75-year-olds and young 80-year-olds, and that you can learn new things. And that when you do try a different game, or you do go to a bridge club versus, you know, cribbage or whatever it may be, learn poker, that it's exercising your brain and it's using a different part of your brain. And your brain will thank you for that. And all those cells in there that are multiplying will definitely thank you. I do want to look up that one app though.
Luminosity.
Luminosity, thank you.
Yes.
I really like that one. And then there's several others. If you would just, you know, you can even just Google memory or cognitive games and all those will come up. They also, you know, sell the books where you know, any of those word puzzles or anything like that is very good for your brain. But not if you do it every day. You have to pick a different game. You can't do the same game for the rest of your life because then it's futile, if that makes sense. You have to change it up and you have to try to do different things and learn new things as we're exercising too and getting that blood flow going. Next slide, please. So there's also spiritual risk factors involved in getting older and losing memory. And as we mentioned, a lot of times as we get older, we have less socialization than we've had. And then we throw in a pandemic and we're all stuck on a computer screen, not getting our hugs, which are so crucial, and lack of involvement in our communities. And so I don't have an answer for that today, other than I'm hoping the end is certainly in sight and we're going to all be able to be back active in the communities again. And that I challenge all of you to get back active once, if you're not already, that it's once it completely opens up, that you if you weren't doing it before, that you definitely do it now, maybe in the spirit that you're helping somebody else. Because some days when I'm not feeling it, I volunteer at, we have an RV in town for the homeless, and I volunteer there a couple times a week. And on the days I don't feel like it, I try to think of the other people. And sometimes when we're older and we have aches and pains and things we don't want to do, if you think that you could inspire somebody else or really make a difference in their life, that's what helps me. And so part of this as well is that we have fewer intergenerational experiences. We've been missing Christmases and birthdays because of the pandemic. And hopefully we're finding ways to integrate all of that for our families. But these are definite spiritual risk factors, unlike they were when I presented this presentation, you know, 3 or 4 years ago. Next slide, please. So being positive has also been clinically shown, like actually just, you know, for instance, if I had been nervous today for this presentation, I read an article recently that was saying that you just tell yourself you're excited or that you're looking forward to it, and you can almost like trick your brain. And by choosing, like before this presentation today, I set an intention. I set an intention that my words would be of service to all of you, and that I would inspire all of you to exercise your brains. And so you have the ability to do that each morning by waking up and saying, I'm choosing to be positive today. Today is going to be a good day, and I'm going to make a difference in the life of someone else, or whatever your thing is. So positivity has been shown to increase lifespan, to lower rates of depression. It's a greater resistance to the common cold, as well as oil of oregano. I'm sorry, I had to throw that one in there. Better psychological and physical well-being, reduced risks of cardiovascular benefits, I'm making Susan laugh, and better coping skills. Next slide, please. Being positive or setting an intention for that can lower rates of cancer, chronic illness, heart disease. It can help with a misdiagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's disease or other dementias. And it can provide you with higher levels of oxytocin, which by in turn lowers stress, increases energy levels, improves mood, increases pain tolerance, decreases blood pressure, and actually has been shown to increase healing time on our wounds when we're thinking positive and imagining that wound healed. Next slide, please. So the more positives you can save up, the easier it is to achieve your dreams. If you're constantly spending your time in the negative, you're limiting your full potential. Next slide.
Oh,
So 50 inner positives. So when you tell yourself, I'm stupid, or whatever your inner dialogue is, which we all have, by the way. Every single human has that inner dialogue where you're telling yourself you could have done something better, or you're less than. And so for each of those, to get our brain back to equilibrium, you have to give 50 inner positives to make up for that one. And so part of, for me personally, when my job was eliminated at the beginning of the pandemic, which my job at Azura was my life, and it was everything to me, and it took me to the ground. And I discovered meditation, and I discovered this whole positive thing. It's literally changed my life. And so I can attest that this is true. And it's really important that we keep our inner dialogue to ourselves positive. And you have the power to do that if that, like when you wake up in the morning, if that's your first thought. If your first thought is something positive, it will change your day. Maybe not in the most noticeable ways right away, but if you continue to do it, it will. Next slide, please. So negative, hit it again, please. Negative versus positive thinking. You have the ability to choose happiness. You have the ability every day to choose, what your day is going to be like. And also the ability to know what your inner self is like, even if you have curveballs thrown at you. Let's see if there's one more slide. I'm not sure. So now I'll take questions if anybody has them.
Feel free, folks, to unmute yourself or turn your camera on, and we can answer some of your questions.
And if you're not comfortable asking me in a group, you can ask later as well.
Okay, I did stop sharing. Does everybody see? I see Lucy and Joyce. Are there any questions out there?
Kelly, what was it that you said the fruit, what antioxidants help to do for you?
But antioxidants, boy, they help in cell multiplication. They're just good for your whole body. Our gut, our stomach, has been shown to be a communicator to our body as well as our brain. And so by eating the dark green vegetables and all the antioxidant fruits, we're putting our cells are, I just imagine when I say this, that our cells are just so happy. When you're eating boxed food or food that has preservatives in it, or chemicals and things like that, our bodies don't know what to do with that because it wasn't probably what was meant to be. And so when you're just eating the fruits and vegetables and the beets and the berries and the spinach, it just helps your whole body to perform better, and it has been clinically shown to improve the cognition in our brain. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Hey, Kelly, I have a question. You talked about not being able to remember words or remember names. To what extent is that normal aging versus, Alzheimer's? I mean, at what extent?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's hard to.
Do you have a specific example? Can I ask, is it yourself or someone else?
It's myself.
Okay. Number one, I'm happy to talk to you about it offline if you'd like to, but okay. Forgetting something in a room or forgetting where you put something at the age of 70 plus is very normal. It's not abnormal. Now, if you were at the store and you didn't know how to get back to your house, or if let's say you were making something, let's say you make your mom's potato salad and you didn't remember how to do that,
okay,
that would be a sign of dementia. Or if you're having issues following any sort of, if you play any games or anything like that, that's a definite sign of dementia. But just forgetting what you came into a room for, I would recommend writing things down. right? You know,
What about remembering people's names and remembering different words? You know, that's my concern.
so can I ask you some specific questions? So are you seeing people that you've known your whole life and not remembering their name? Or are you in conversation just not able to pull their name?
Or even when I see them, I can't say it's people that I've known forever. No, they're people that I've recently met and having trouble coming up with their name when I see them.
Okay. So just so I can make sure I'm understanding, these aren't people that you've known your whole life. They're people you've recently met, which
Yes.
I do all the time. As we get older, our brain does it to some degree get smaller, and we don't retain some of the short-term memory that we used to.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing from you, and I'm again stating I'm not a doctor and this is not a diagnosis, that you're just having normal, and this is hard to answer because I hear myself and I'm not being clear. Not remembering people's names who you just met is definitely not a sign of dementia, though. If you couldn't remember your son's name or your daughter's name or maybe doctor's name or your first grade, teacher's name or something like that. But sometimes when we start to like worry about it, like for sure when I was going through menopause, my cognition, like I was concerned slightly. Like I was not remembering things to the point where I started to write it down just so I had a something to look at. If you are worried about it, you could keep a little journal and write it down when you're forgetting something. And maybe when you look back on it, you notice that it wasn't nearly as significant as what you think. Do you live alone, sir?
No, I have a wife.
Because I would, if you're able, I would talk to her too about it and see if she notices anything.
Oh, she does. That's why I'm here. No, I elected to sit in on this myself.
Okay.
But she realizes that.
Something if it is, and I don't mean to make light of your concern by any means.
Yeah.
If it is something that you're wanting to know, if it was me and I was talking to my father or my brother or whatever, I would suggest that you go to your family practice doctor, and that you have them do a mini cognitive test on you. And just FYI, you can Google that, and your wife could give it to you as well. You Google mini cognitive test dementia.
Mini cognitive test
dementia.
dementia.
And then just don't go to the first site that pops up. Don't go to the ads. Don't go to those first couple sites.
Yeah.
A couple to where you're seeing a reputable site like Mayo Clinic or something. Mayo Clinic's a good one.
Okay.
And then there's a free test you can take. I would recommend not doing it by yourself because you want to have a balance there.
Okay.
And I've given that test to some people. So I think it's a quality test. And if you can do that, and if that's not satisfactory to you, then I would just go into your doctor. Because what happens when people, I commend you for talking about it right now. Because I find that with our brain, there's some shame involved. And I haven't said this during this presentation, but I also find that there's a difference between a man and a woman having cognitive issues. And when a man has dementia, from my experience, my personal professional experience, he becomes emasculated in the disease because in the generation you're in, sir, you were the provider, I'm going to assume, and you were you were the breadwinner.
Yep.
And so a lot of times when a man is actually forgetting things, which I don't believe you are, actually has I shouldn't say it like that, actually has a cognitive impairment,
Yes.
which I don't believe you do at this point. That is another factor in it because they've been the primary person in the household.
Sure.
It's very hard to give up, and that's very hard to swallow, if I may say. So, I hope I helped. If there's anything I can do, you can absolutely reach out to me.
Okay.
I think that have your wife take the test too.
Good. I know she'd pass it.
Great questions. I did type in the chat, mini cognitive test dementia, and that was what you had suggested Googling.
Yeah.
And there was a question about, are we going to send this recording out? And the answer is yes. Everybody that has registered for the program will get a copy of the link, even if they weren't able to be here today.
And I also
All
appreciate
right.
the evaluations you all have. I like feedback. I'll take negative or
Yes.
positive. I do
Yep.
appreciate it all, and it helps me to be a better presenter. If you have any feedback for me, I would appreciate it.
Sure, we will send everybody an email. Oh, go ahead, Babs.
I have a question. I have family, as an example, in my grandmother's family who had 8 children. 7 of them all were diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And now, and the first daughter wasn't, because she had a different father, we believe. It's now hitting the next generation, which would be my parents' generation, but my dad is gone, but his first cousins have now started being diagnosed. How worried does the next generation need to be?
I mean, I'm a blunt person, so I mean, it's clearly there, right? It's in your genetics,
Yes,
in your
very
genetic,
much.
the genetic makeup. I mean, my first thought on that is that what would be so helpful is if someone in your extended family would go and be part of a study to see what's going on with the brains in that family. You know, the thing with dementia is you can't just see when the person's alive what's going on. And so I'm not even a researcher, and that made me very curious about what's going on there. And so my initial reaction is that if you do, like, that's a hard subject to broach with people, and I can talk almost about anything with the elderly, but and if I can find it, I'm happy. If you reach out to me, I'll try to send you the link to the study that I was referencing earlier from UW-Madison. But participating in clinical research when you have a connection like this is one of the ways it's going to help. Now, for the next generations, you said your dad's passed, but your cousin, how old is the cousin?
Well, the cousins are all in their 80s, late 70s and 80s.
So is the cousin that you referenced diagnosed with dementia then right now?
Yes, they were.
And in a home or living alone?
They have since passed.
Oh, okay, I see.
And now my generation, who's in my late 60s, are now, you know, have seen these now there are several family members yet that are still out there, but I don't know that they've been diagnosed yet, because I'm not that close to them. On the other side of it, my grandmother was 95 and didn't have issues, on my mom's side. So that's always been a concern for me, that my dad's side of the family, it's very prevalent. My mother's side of the family, it's not. So
No,
I did sign up for a study that once in a while I'll get something
Good.
from an Alzheimer's
Good.
group.
Bravo to you for doing that, really. Bravo, thank you.
And I've tried to encourage others, but I don't think they've done it.
It's hard. It's very, like, you said that better than I did, because it's a personal preference. And if someone's not, you know, some people feel that way about research and about things like that. So I understand. What I was going to say as a professional recommendation, if I were you, what I would be doing is I would take, you know, a cognitive supplement of some sort. And I'm not up on, I'm sorry that the one that was mentioned earlier is probably the most,
Prevagen.
yeah, Prevagen. And I would exercise. I would get the circulation in my body going every single day as much as I can. And those are, like, really, if those would be the two things I would personally do. And the brain exercises, and then probably everything we talked about in this presentation. And it definitely doesn't mean that you're going to get it. You know, there's lifestyle and things like that too, but just to be preventative and to be doing all the things you can to, you know, to keep your brain as healthy as you possibly can, would be beneficial to you, I believe.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question.
Yes, thanks, Babs. Anybody else? I still see several people on. I know we're a little bit past the 2 o'clock mark, but this is a fascinating subject, and we would like to get everybody's questions answered if you have them. So feel free to take yourself off of mute. If you're not comfortable, you can type it into the chat and I can address the question with Kelly.
I have another question. Kelly, I saw you drinking from a soda can, and in the past it was said that you shouldn't, aluminum was the issue. And I don't know if cans still have aluminum in them or if they've changed it, but is that an issue?
That's so funny, because I'm just going to talk for a minute about the aluminum can. because I just quit drinking Powerade Zero, which was a really big deal for me because it has aspartame in it. And I started drinking water with Pedialyte in it because I mentioned I'm not a water drinker. And a friend of mine stopped over and gave me this Diet Coke today, and I'm drinking it, which I don't ever drink soda, which cracks me up. But getting back to your question, I'm not up on my aluminum clinical studies right now. I haven't been asked that. I've never been asked that question. From my recall, without Googling anything or whatever, I don't think it was ever really substantiated. I think there might have been something, but I don't think it's enough to be a big red flag or anything like that as to the cause of dementia. And so with all those things, like, I'll use this as an example. I felt that I was drinking too many Powerade Zeros in a day, and my level of aspartame was too great for the risk I was taking, to not be dehydrated like that little dude on my screen. So a month and I stopped drinking Powerade Zero, which I felt like I was like getting off heroin or something, because it was like, no kidding, it was real, you guys. And so I think anything in moderation is fine. Is if you're doing something where you feel like if you're drinking 20 sodas a day in aluminum, that's probably just for the chemicals in it alone aren't good for you. You know, that's how I try to live my life, is in balance and say not too much of anything, you know. So I'm getting my Diet Coke in.
Any other questions?
See, I had something, David had a question earlier about, having difficulty sometimes recalling a name or a place or something like that. I have that too. But I seem like I've always had that. But one thing that my wife had suggested, and it's amazing how well it works, is when you're struggling for a name, very often, if you just mentally go through the alphabet, starting with A, Adam, and move on to that, B, Brent, Brad, Ben, and just move your way through there. It's just amazing how often you'll come up with it and you'll say, oh yeah, Kyle, when you get to the case. Thank you so
much, Rick. That is a really good way that I didn't mention, to go through the alphabet. It's also a brain exercise to do that, because you're exercising your brain and going through the alphabet.
Sure.
So thank you. That was, I had not mentioned that. And that is definitely a technique to use. That is not only exercising your brain, but hopefully you'll come up with the person's name.
Yes.
And it's one of those things, like if your whole life you struggle with names, which I have too, like I have to say the person's name like 3 times as soon as I meet them, like I had a thing. And if it's something your whole life, then it's less likely to be an issue as you get older too. But thank you for that tip. That was a great tip.
Everybody says they have trouble remembering names, but they're all lying. I'm the only one.
I love it.
I have a question about water. You talked about 8 glasses of water. Does it have to be water or is it liquid? So coffee, tea, lemonade, do those count, or does it need to be 8 glasses of water? I drink tons of water. I don't drink anything sweet other than wine. And
so
other people say, well, I drink a lot all day long, but it's not water.
Right.
It's everything else. So that's one question. Is it 8 glasses of water or is it just 8 glasses of fluid?
Well, my first job out of college was at Jenny Craig Weight Loss. And I moved out to Beverly Hills and worked in a Beverly Hills Jenny Craig. And then I moved back to Wisconsin and grew ginseng and drove a tractor within a 2-week period. And so theoretically, doctors and weight loss professionals state that it should be water. Coffee is definitely not a substitute for water because it can be it can dehydrate you. And my answer to your question would be the recommendation is 8 glasses of actual water. Now, if someone's drinking like lemonade, I'll break that down what that says in my brain. It says sugar. So they're putting sugar, unless they're drinking like Crystal Light, which then I'm saying there's a chemical in there that's cancer causing. So anything we're putting in our water, more than likely, isn't good for us. And so if you're looking at the healthy part of it, and that the water is giving you moisture to your body, the best way is just water. Yeah. And to not, I mean, my mom sips Diet Pepsi all day and says she's drinking water, and that's not what's going on. I mean, that doesn't count. I mean, it counts a little, you're getting liquid, but it isn't your body isn't liking it. It's not what's best for your brain or your gut or your cells in your body to multiply. And I say this as someone that drank Powerade Zero for like 10 years, but, and whatever, I just was quiet during that conversation. But, for me, it has to be a mindset. Like I have to force myself. Like I got a Brita water filter and I had to make it a big deal. And like, for me to be able to drink water. So, but the recommendation is that it's actual water. I mean, you can put lemon and cucumbers and you can make water taste better with natural things, natural vegetables and fruits. But anything else in there is usually not as healthy.
How about an herbal tea?
Yeah, tea's a little bit different. I think tea, this is my opinion, I'm not a doctor, could count for a couple, one or two if you had teas. I think tea would be an okay substitution, in my opinion, for 1 or 2 waters in a day, yes. Or
Great.
more if you do. It's not gonna count because it's good for you.
Thank you.
Sure.
David, I saw that you were going to ask a question. Would you still like to ask your question?
No, I guess not. I was just going to acknowledge his input. I forget his name over there, Rick, or whoever it was, as far as his help to go through the alphabet and such. That's all.
Yeah, David, just start with A, and by the time you get to R, you'll remember my name.
And the only way that I remembered Rick's name, though, just so y'all know, is it was on
I did.
I mean, and I read it though. That's how I remember. Is if I read something, I can usually remember it. So
and the other trick I do is if I meet somebody and if I can, and I've got a little booklet that I will write down their name, so that I can review it later to say, okay, this was a person I met, and here's the circumstances where I met them, that sort of thing. That helps me. But
can I ask you a question, David?
Yeah.
It's kind of a personal question, so if you don't want, and we're in front of people, so if you don't want to answer it, I will not be offended. Do you have any history of any cognitive issues in your family on your side?
Yes, both sides.
Okay.
My grandmother, that would be my dad's grandmother. She had back in the day, it was called hardening of the arteries. So she had dementia. And also my mother, who just recently passed away at age 98, she had short-term memory problems, very bad, the last 3, 4, 5 years of her life, which progressively got worse. So I'm concerned about myself, and just so I know, and I keep thinking, all right, what can I do if I'm going to get it, that the chance of the chance of you getting it increases as you get older. What can I do to forestall it as long as I can?
You're touching my heart because you're talking about it, and as a man, and I think that that's really cool. My opinion on those 2 family members, just to give you my opinion, is that it sounds like the one with the hardening of the arteries, that was a condition that happened, and so I don't think that that's necessarily hereditary. But I'm not a doctor.
Okay.
And your mom, if I understood correctly, didn't have any short-term memory problems until she turned 95?
Well, something like that. Yeah. Yeah. She maintained pretty well on her own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's in your favor too.
Yes.
Definitely in your favor. I don't know that would even been diagnosed as dementia. I mean, her brain was in her body for 95 years.
Yeah.
Forgetting a few things. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be happy to talk to you about it in more detail, and I'm not trying to make light of it.
Yeah.
I'm happier to hear that you didn't have a family member that was diagnosed at 70 and ended up in a home and had, and so that is to your benefit, that it didn't happen that way. And I commend you for being at this forum and for sharing this with all of us, because you're helping others. So bravo to you.
Definitely.
And you need to reach out. I'd love to know how you do on your mini cognitive test, if you'd like to let me know.
I don't know if I want to take it with my wife or not.
I'll take it. Call me up. I'll give it to you. We can do it over the phone.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, David. I wanted to mention that I will include Kelly's email and phone number in the email that we send you. It won't be until tomorrow, once we get the video edited for the few minutes that I was on without anything happening. And but we will send that out.
I have been places I've been in, and I've received phone calls out of the. I saw your presentation 2 years ago on United Way, and I've been meaning to, and I smile every time I get one of those. And it just happened a couple months ago where a lady called and saw me, and I helped her. I mean, I helped her place her.
Oh,
So
that is fantastic.
So I mean that if you reach out, it's part of my volunteering that I do, and I don't mind at all. It's better. I'd rather give information than someone be struggling with not having all the information you need.
Wonderful. Well, I can't thank you enough, Kelly. It was always a very popular in-person presentation, and this was wonderful. So I think people felt comfortable asking questions. And I thank all of you for joining us. And please watch for an email with some survey questions so that we can give those to Kelly so she can learn, like she said, especially in this virtual model. And then you'll get the link to the presentation. And thank you so much for joining us today. And if there aren't any other questions, last ask. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Kelly. And thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon and stay warm. It's going to get cold.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day. Don't forget to eat with your other hand tonight.
That's right. Oh, yeah, Babs is still on there. Recording has started. Okay.
It said like 2 hours and 16 minutes, or what?
How do I stop recording? Oh, there we go. Stop recording.